the audio perfectly from my iPad, Rudy. Um, I plan on buying getting a microphone for the holiday season, like yourself. I plan on getting a microphone right now, making ends meet with what I currently have, and just glad to talk some football again. It's right.
A lot of is we're going to go into some of those. Of course, we'll start with the Steelers way down AFC North, and then we'll get into Dodgers couldn't duck from the hit that he had ending his entire season. We're going to talk about that as well, and then their upcoming battle, what they did against the Bills, and obviously a big road test heading into Arlington, taking on the Dallas Cowboys. So it's going to be fun.
I bet. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, it sounds good to me too. Hold on, let me put on the focals. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to see anything. Okay, there we go. The world is now brighter and shinier than it was a minute ago. All right, cool. So let me see here. I'm going to try to use kind of a double recording here. Not really going to affect anything that you're doing on your end, but I'm going to record both of us and see if it actually comes through.
Sounds great.
Okay, well, I got your audio, so we're good there. All right, I'll go back and edit here in a moment. Let me just restart this, and it's showtime, of course. Good old StreamYard. I'll put a segue with you in. I'm glad your eye's better.
Thanks, Rudy. I appreciate that, man. It's feeling a lot better. It's not 100% yet, but I'll tell you more after the show. We got to get started.
No worries. No, it's all good. It's all good, man. No worries. All right, let's end the show here.
The Rude Dog Show with Rudy Reyes.
Happy Friday once again. Here we are. Of course, this is Rudy Reyes on the RudeDogShow.com. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of your evening out here to entertain me, or I should say maybe I'm entertaining you. I guess we're going to find out exactly what that looks like and what that sounds like by the end of the show. I have a special guest. It's been a while since I've had him on the show. He does great things at Draft Utopia. Go throw him a follow on Twitter, would you? Because I'm asking nicely, pretty please. Welcome, Chris Ransom, to the show. Chris, man, how are you? Thanks for coming on. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. You're right. I'm not going to sing the song. It's been a while. That would be extremely corny. It'd be about as corny as the ACC Network soccer game between Virginia Tech and Louisville. And I do watch college soccer usually on Friday nights, but I checked the ACC Network and found out that was the game they're airing. No Duke, no Syracuse, no Pittsburgh. So I'm like, forget this. I'd rather do a podcast with the Rude Dog Show, but that's not why I showed up. We got a ton of interesting storylines in the National Football League that we're ready to tackle, like TJ Watt in that 30-7 blowout against the 49ers. And I'm pretty sure that's what you wanted to lead off with anyway. So the timing's perfect.
Yeah, I would say a blowout would probably be at least a one-sided piece of the entire puzzle. And when I say that, I mean, okay, look, we can put all the stats here. We can say there are 213 and 122 and 3 in the record in the AFC North all time. That's great and wonderful. Throw that out the window. Forget I even mentioned it because it's not relevant. This is a thing of the past. But this team is struggling with what looks like and apparently should be the future with Kenny Pickett under center, second year, drafted in the year before's draft. And more importantly, I'm kind of miffed here, Chris, and please help me with this because I look at myself and I think if I was Kenny Pickett, what would Kenny Pickett do? Well, he'd want a more elaborate offensive scheme. He would want to make it a little bit easier. He would want to get rid of the ball in a timely fashion to wide receivers who would actually come back to the ball. Now, with that being said, Chris, Matt Canada did not make it look easy. He's not a broadcast-friendly guy. You hardly ever see long-term interviews with him because, A, he doesn't like the media. Secondly, he balked at the fact that he's being held responsible, or at least from our eyes and our standpoint, we always know that it's not the players' faults that get looked at the most or first, it's the coaches. So when Matt Canada wanted to call this a cry wolf mode in regards to being the offensive coordinator, not having a solid game plan together for the Steelers against the 49ers, and I did watch that game, in fact, a day before my 50th birthday. So they had already blown out the candles before I had a chance to even look at the cake because they blew it at home in an opener that was more lopsided than me wearing a tutu. I look at this, Chris, and I think to myself, man, time and time again, the ineptitude of Matt Canada seems to rear its ugly head in times that we don't really expect it, or we shouldn't expect it. What did you see from this blowout against the 49ers at home that maybe had your feathers ruffled?
Well, for starters, one of the impressions I had heading into the season was Broderick Jones would be Pickett's blind side, but Dan Moore played better than him in the preseason and earned the job. So I'm not going to throw shade at Dan Moore when we both agreed the offensive shade should be mostly thrown at coordinator Matt Canada, offensive coordinator. We agree on that. So, but the defense looked so much more disciplined in the preseason. I mean, even the backups, Quan Alexander, were tackling well. And I thought those guys they added at linebacker, Cole Holcomb, etc., they weren't as upside wasn't as high as the previous regime starters, but at the same token, they played well enough in the preseason to earn the benefit of the doubt. And San Francisco just picked Pittsburgh apart. Brandon Ayuk, 8 receptions on all 8 targets, caught everything thrown his way, had himself a day. Christian McCaffrey had that 65-yard run. He had himself a day. So, I mean, San Francisco, the rumor was they were going to put Brock Purdy on a pitch count, but apparently that was a smokescreen just to try to get Pittsburgh to mess with them. And I feel like Tomlin's one of the best coaches in the league, but the game plan wasn't really necessarily the best executed. I think the thought process was if we double team, triple team Nick Bosa, the rest of the defensive line for San Francisco won't do jack against us. And, Drake Jackson, after dominating at USC and struggling as a rookie due to limited reps, he finally has his breakout game with 3 sacks. Rick Armstead had the QB pressure on the penalty by the Niners that was negated, and Hargrave had the sack too, I believe. So just very stout play by San Francisco's defensive line and Steve Wilkes' very first game as defensive coordinator with the 49ers after being Carolina's interim head coach. And just looking at the 49ers, Purdy made all the right decisions, and everybody on that supporting cast had their moments, but Ayuk and McCaffrey were the 2 stars who really dominated and controlled the tempo of the game for San Francisco.
Yeah, they certainly did from the onset. And what I didn't like was that I just didn't see any fluidity. Kenny Pickett, yes, he lost the ball. He, fell forward with the ball going forward, and in turn, that was a turnover. There was something about this game that, okay, fine. No one wants to go back and say, this was a trap game. Absolutely not. That's ridiculous. This is a kickoff game at home against the team and Mr. Irrelevant, who's now more than relevant in this case and in this instance. He's done so much during his rehab, and I think ultimately he was able to be better, to become better, to evolve into that starting quarterback, whereas he was thrown into a situation where you had 2 quarterbacks. One ultimately got traded to the aforementioned Dallas Cowboys. But more importantly, this is about what the Steelers didn't do. They didn't stop the run up front. They weren't able to capitalize on any turnovers because clearly they didn't force any turnovers. If there was any issues whatsoever, it was on the Steeler defense not being able to stop the run. They weren't able to close the gaps. There was a lot of confusion. Yeah, there were sightings of Quan Alexander, but that was limited all into itself. Cam Hayward will now not play against the Browns because of a groin surgery that he acquired while playing the 49ers in an injury situation. So now you're going to have to get the next man up, whoever that is. Cam Hayward, as stout as he is, certainly has found himself ultimately healing from this. I believe a groin surgery procedure will last anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks.
Yep.
So predictably, the Steelers fell into the 49er trap, maybe underestimating their opponent. There was some taunting from Patrick Peterson saying, "You're not going to throw it my way. There's no way you throw it my way." He picked on Patrick Peterson all game long, and it paid dividends for him.
And Ayuk made that touchdown. Ayuk's second touchdown was the Patrick Peterson play where Peterson was covering him, but Ayuk just was able to catch the ball in traffic and reel in 6 more points for the Niners. So, yeah, and another thing you got to keep an eye on is Larry Ogunjobi's injury. This was the second day in a row he didn't practice. And I figured with the Steelers' depth chart, if Hayward's out and Ogunjobi's playing, then you put DeMarvin Leal at 34 right in and you keep Loudermilk on the sidelines. But it's Loudermilk is the backup to Hayward. And we could see Loudermilk and Leal starting against Cleveland if Ogunjobi is ruled out against his former team that drafted him, the Cleveland Browns, in Monday Night Football. I mean,
yeah, I believe so as well. I truly, you know what? I've been a fan of both guys. I think both of them have deserved that backup spot to Cam Hayward. And if they rotate the linebackers in like they should without Cam Hayward in the lineup, I believe both of them, depending on how relative they are in regards to stopping the run and being able to penetrate the backfield, it's not just going to be on them, though. I mean, it has to be on everybody up front for the Steelers. I mean, if they don't own the line, the Browns are just going to run all over them. I mean, we've seen Myles Garrett and what he did against Joe Burrow in that almost shutout against the Bengals. So there's no reason to take the Browns lightly in this situation at all, despite your familiarity with your team within that respective conference you play in.
You can't take your division rival lightly. That goes for the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers because DeJuan Jones is making his first NFL start in relief of Jack Conklin after filling in for Conklin, who tore his MCL and PCL out for the year. And DeJuan Jones has been mind-bogglingly good in the preseason. Very impressive, great at the point of attack. And for a 4th-round pick, this is a guy everybody on draft Twitter had a 2nd or 3rd round grade on, but he's shown not only can he be a day one starter, he could potentially develop into a Pro Bowler. And his first test is going to be TJ Watt. So this is a big game for both DeJuan Jones and TJ Watt. And ultimately, I think Steelers edge rushers versus the Browns offensive line is ultimately going to determine the direction this game goes in.
Absolutely. And look, I take nothing away from what the Browns did. They looked the part. I mean, yeah, fine. So there was a blowout of the Bengals. Joe Burrow got his bag. And of course, another AFC North quarterback, Lamar Jackson, got his bag. So I think there was a lot to consider before the regular season for both of those quarterbacks. My biggest question is whether or not Kenny Pickett and Matt Canada can come to an agreement to not disagree in order to create an actual passing game and to create some type of confusion. I mean, if you want to put a tight end in a slot, okay, fine. If you want to put 2 tight ends in the slot, lead blockers, and then you have your catching tight end right next to them in a bunch formation, then do that. I see nothing whatsoever throughout the entire game that would make me believe in any given snap that you're going to find Pickett throwing the ball downfield to whomever, even in a short yardage situation, in order to capitalize and create first downs and keep moving the chains. I've seen this dog and pony show before with Matt Canada. He did it with Ben Roethlisberger. He's done it with other quarterbacks in the Steelers' stead, Mason Rudolph, no exception to that rule. But there's just so much not to like about the offensive play calling in that specific game. So with that being said, do the Steelers have a chance to beat the Browns? Or are they going to be another victim of more creativity defensively by the Browns D and embarrass the Steelers at home for a second Sunday in a row?
I'm not sure what's going to happen with the Steelers, but I'm thinking Mike Sullivan might get promoted to offensive coordinator if things don't change. He's the quarterback's coach with the Steelers. He was on the Giants during their 2 Super Bowl wins. He was a receivers coach in 2007, and he was a quarterback's coach in 2012. But he got promoted to offensive coordinator with the Buccaneers following the Giants' 2nd Super Bowl win. Things didn't work out there in Tampa, but that's because Tampa Bay was just a mess at quarterback at the time in like 2013. in the 2012-2013 season. I think that was Josh Freeman's last year in the league. Just had a very different offense compared to now. And I think if Sullivan got a second shot at coordinator, I don't think he would screw up this time around. So I think that move will come if the Steelers cannot take care of business against the Browns. I don't know if it'll come this Monday or this Tuesday after this game, or if it'll come later in the season. But I think that's really the only move you can make if you move on from Canada, because none of the other positional coaches have coordinator experience, and Mike Sullivan does. So yeah, when I was on my phone, you probably saw me on Restream when I was recording. I've been recording this for 15 minutes, Rudy 13. But like when I was on my phone, I was looking up the Steelers positional coaches to see who they could bring in to replace Canada. And apparently Mike Sullivan has previous offensive coordinator experience, the Steelers quarterback coach, not to be confused with the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins, Rudy.
Yeah, they're definitely not the same. One's on ice and one's on grass.
Exactly.
So we can't confuse one Sullivan to another Sullivan. But you can call me Sully, or maybe even Salty if the Steelers start 0-2, which has not been done since the 1940s, 1941, in fact, for Pittsburgh. So I feel as though the Steelers need to take a step forward, or they're going to continue going backwards as long as Matt Canada is the OC. Now, I'm not going to place the blame solely on Matt Canada's shoulders, but at the end of the day, when you don't have an offensive game plan, when you don't have a way to define where the wide receivers should be or should not be, and how to line up and what that actually looks like, not only on paper and X's and O's, but in practice. And obviously in training camp certainly was the proving ground for
one thing Matt Canada said in an interview is that he never calls hot routes. I'm cringing over that because whenever I play my older brother in Madden all the time, I always call hot routes, because if he's playing zone coverage and I call a deep pass, you know what I have to do? I have to adjust to a shorter medium pass in order to move the chains, in order to make a completion. So the fact that Matt Canada refuses to call a hot route, either it's just laziness or stubbornness. It might be a combination of both, but that's inexcusable, because everybody, even video game people who play Madden like I did when I was younger, I don't play it as much now, but when I played my brother in Long Beach, I had to call hot routes. I had to adjust to the formation. So you're getting paid money to do this as an offensive coordinator, so you have to make those adjustments. The one positive.
But you know what? In all fairness, Chris, there were no adjustments in the second half of this game. It was clearly obvious that there were no real adjustments made, maybe to snap count, maybe to lineups in regards to where the wide receivers are going to be. But, okay, look, Matt Canada can't call the play and throw the ball. We all know that. Everybody knows that. It's not rocket science. But more importantly, it's about execution and getting Kenny Pickett to execute the play calls. And if you don't have any creativity via play calls and you're an offensive coordinator, you shouldn't be the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and Sullivan, look at the bio. Yeah, Mike Sullivan, former Army, Army, that was his alma mater. Quarterbacks coach. He was the offensive coordinator of the 2012 Buccaneers. That year, Josh Freeman threw a career 4,000 passing yards. I mean, he's not a great option, but if he can get Josh Freeman to throw for 4,000 passing yards, that's probably the guy who should be calling the plays instead of Matt Canada. Just saying. Because Kenny Pickett's got more potential than Freeman at this point.
Absolutely right, especially being, his second year, ultimately. So a lot of things to be desired for Pittsburgh.
I think I just made the argument for firing Matt Canada that every Steelers fan wanted to hear.
I believe so. It wasn't. It was justified in the numbers alone, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So with that being said, look, last weekend we seen a slow starting Bengals team.
I wanted to say one last thing about the Steelers. We didn't mention the Deontay Johnson injury, and the Steelers, I think they might actually be better. I really was a big fan of Calvin Austin III coming out of Memphis. He'll be playing in the slot next to Allen Robinson and George Pickens. This injury might be a blessing in disguise for the passing game, assuming Pickett makes the right decisions, but I'm not sure how confident I am with Canada calling the plays. But that was my final thoughts on that game. We'll pivot to the Bengals now. Because I know you want to.
Since you opened that can, I'm just going to say it like it is. And anybody who knows me, and we've talked about Deontay Johnson, not a fan. I'm not a fan. I haven't been a fan. Wasn't a fan when he was drafted. Still not a fan.
All he did was run deep routes and catch the ball, but he dropped a lot of passes in college, and that's translated over to the pros.
It has. Within the last couple of years, he's kind of cleaned that up a little bit. The problem is that he's injured every year. His durability is in question. And the fact alone that he had mentioned that the two guys that were trying to replace him, look, if you're injured and you're on the sidelines, for whatever that's worth, and they produce more than you are replaceable. Everybody on an NFL team on the 53-man roster is replaceable if production is there. End of story.
Yep.
End of story. It doesn't matter where you're at. Doesn't matter if it's NFL year up. That was probably about 10 or 15 years ago. It doesn't matter. You produce, you stay. You don't produce, you're gone. It's simple. This is a no fun league or not for long. Take your pick. Either way, they're done. And that could be the case for him, for Deontay Johnson. So I'm not a fan. We'll never be a fan. And that's all there is to that.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned pivot. I think this is a huge golf style pivot, to say the very least. Of course, you got to avoid, or maybe a divot rather, avoid the divot with a nice full pivot. With that being said, that full pivot will start off with the Bengals and the Browns. It looked like a slow start from the beginning of this game. I didn't really think much of it. And then Myles Garrett got involved. And we know there's history between him and the Steelers and the helmet hit with Mason Rudolph and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think he's cleaned up his act so much so that he's more focused on the football intricacies and what he can do to be probably one of the better pass rushers, not just in the AFC North, but in the AFC and maybe even in the NFL.
The Browns were more focused and disciplined heading into this contest. That's really all there is to say about this game, Rudy, because, Joe Burrow, he actually did a commercial for Beats, the headphone company he has an endorsement deal with, right after his haircut. And I don't know if he did that during the week, but if he had the same haircut he had when he signed his contract extension when he was filming that commercial. So that tells me he probably either filmed that commercial before he signed his extension or after, which is a distraction, number one. Number two, Jamar Chase, his body language in that game was awful. I mean, just as bad as the offensive coordinator for the Bengals drawing up the plays, because Jamar Chase. When you think of Jamar Chase, you think of his vertical streak route, you think of his post routes, you think of his slants. The Bengals were not incorporating any of those routes into Chase's route tree. They were only calling wheel routes and screen passes. And Chase can run those routes at a high level. He did at LSU. It's just those aren't the big plays that translate to first downs and touchdowns from Chase that you're used to seeing at the NFL level. And the fact that the Bengals went away from that, which was kind of their identity on offense the last 2 years with Chase, I mean, what that tells me, either Jim Schwartz devised an excellent game plan or the Bengals were just so complacent and so focused on winning the Battle of Ohio and just thinking this would be a cakewalk of a game, with Chase calling them elves. And then when he wasn't getting the ball, he was just pouting, just really angry, really mad. I'm trying to do a Jamar Chase pout, and I'm doing a horrible impression of it, but he showed zero interest, and he wasn't showing that same happy-go-lucky, fun-loving energy he showed during his rookie year in the Bengals. He was just pouting like a beggar begging for a new deal, a new contract, which he's due for at the end of the season.
Well, he may be due for it, but look, when you call someone out, when you say you're playing the elves, that means the elves, and if they kick your butt, well, then guess what? You just got your butt kicked, and he wasn't happy about it.
And he didn't even give them even credit for winning. He just called them elves, and he said, we lost to a bunch of sorry-ass elves.
At the end, again, one of those things where you don't put your performance where your mouth is, and vice versa. It means nothing at the end of the day. So the elves took down Gulliver and Gulliver's Travels, and that's exactly what happened here. He got his butt kicked. And
the Browns social media team posted a video of Tigger from Winnie the Pooh walking back to Kentucky in the snow. Kudos to the Browns social media team for coming up with a clever way to insult the Bengals. And they showed the Garrett fourth down sack against Burrow during that video too.
Well, of course they did. Why wouldn't they? That's like the biggest video. Well, not the biggest video, but certainly one of like a handful of videos where, of course, we were watching last night when Justin Jefferson. Was it a touchback? Was it not a touchback? I don't know. We're not really going to touch that. But look, the bottom line is that the Bengals took a step backwards against Myles Garrett and company on the defensive line. And perhaps no one thought that the Bengals had the money to lock up a guy like Joe Burrow. And in all fairness, that's exactly what they did. Now, what they didn't do is count on the fact that Orlando Brown, who protected the blind side for Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, ultimately did do his job. Or that pass rush was so good, they outplayed him. I don't know. It could be either or. But I know this. Orlando Brown just did not pay dividends in this game. A 3-24 loss at Paul Brown. It's good. Look, it isn't the worst thing that could happen. Of course, Steelers go and lay a base almost a goose egg as well at home. A loss is a loss, whether it's by 1.2 points, 3 or more. It doesn't matter. A loss is a loss. But look, if for some reason the Bengals can't fix Orlando Brown or can't fix this offensive line, it's going to be a long season for Joe Burrow.
Yeah, and Lael Collins got released by the team earlier this week after being on IR. Jonah Williams and the backup running back Travion Williams both gave up a sack to Myles Garrett on 4th down. And if Joe Mixon's not in the game on that 4th down, then you bring in Chase Brown. I just don't think very highly of Travion Williams, so I question the idea of him being out in that 4th down situation in the first place. Because him and Jonah Williams both gave up the sack to Garrett on 4th down, but it was Orlando Brown gave up some quarterback pressures to Garrett as well, and Zadarius Smith, some of these other guys in this defensive line, Dalvin Tomlinson, were able to get a few QB pressures in the game as well, and the coverage schemes that Schwartz deployed were brilliant. Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson, Newsome were all able to make a deflection at different points in the game, and even Grant Delpit had a good deflection on one of the plays intended for Higgins in the 3rd quarter. So just a very good team effort by the Cleveland Browns defense in week 1.
No, it looked really, really good. And one of the things that I find to be kind of a problem is that they're going to be at home and facing the Baltimore Ravens, who just got done beating up the Houston Texans in a similar fashion, 25-9 this past Sunday. But look, the sidebar is this. Whether you're talking Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow, whether it's a $15 million difference, it doesn't matter. Joe Burrow needs to be protected in order to get that ball off when he needs to, when he has to, when he must. He has to have the protection to do so. That's all there is to it. He's not a very mobile quarterback. He does have wheels, and we've seen him use them from time to time. But if you can't protect the guy on the line, then he's going to be running for his life. And you know what? Could be a blessing in disguise. We've seen it just a couple of years ago when they took on the Los Angeles Rams in the Super Bowl. The Rams ultimately won that game. But one of the things that he did was doing great and throwing great on the run. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise for Joe Burrow to maybe get out of the mode of this ultimate protection up front, which would allow for him to get out of the pocket, scramble, make things happen down the field. We're going to have to see what that looks like. But the Baltimore Ravens, despite on the offensive side of the ball, losing J.K. Dobbins for the season, I don't see Lamar Jackson and company losing to the Bengals. I just don't. There's so much to like about the Ravens and how they play and the way they've been playing, and despite the Lamar Jackson holdout and getting that situation righted, I think there's just a lot of great things that they're doing to prevent prevent further injuries. Harbaugh does a great job of getting their team prepared for regular season, postseason, if that's even formidable. I just think the Ravens are going to end up giving the Bengals more than they can handle and getting to Joe Burrow more frequently than he would like. And I think the Ravens go on and win this game against the Bengals at home at Paul Brown.
I took the Browns 28-20 over the Bengals last week. I'm surprised the Browns showed up and held the Bengals to 3 points. But the Ravens, I think the Bengals win this because the Ravens just have a ton of injuries right now. Not just Dobbins, Marlon Humphrey, their best corner, is out. it's already been reported that Tyler Linderbaum and Ronnie Stanley, the Ravens' 2 first-round picks on the offensive line, are also out.
Mark Andrews is questionable.
Mark Andrews should play. He is questionable, but he should play. He was a full practice on Friday, and he was limited on Thursday. So I do think Mark Andrews will end up playing.
I do as well. He's the ultimate security blanket. He's what Heath Miller meant to Ben Roethlisberger.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that much.
I mean,
but that's just my opinion.
He had very good tape at Oklahoma. Like before the 2018 Combine, where Mike Gesicki dominated, Mark Andrews had the best tape of any tight end in college football as that security blanket to Baker Mayfield. And I'm kind of curious to see how the Shrine Game superstar Zay Flowers. I was at the Shrine Game at Allegiant Stadium in Vegas this year. They're moving it to Fort Worth, but I was at the last one in Vegas, and I got to see Zay Flowers ball out and dominate. And his guy just had moves, agility. Not only was he a good route runner, unlike Tavon Austin or Marcus Brown or John Ross, he had the moves, the speed, the precision. So, like, I'm kind of curious to see what he's going to do against the Bengals because he showed he could carry the Ravens with Andrews and Dobbins out in that first career NFL start for him. 9 receptions. I think he had 87 total yards, 78 receiving yards, 9 rushing.
Yeah, one of the things I like about Mark Andrews, he's just a durable guy. He's big, he's athletic, he knows how to catch the ball, he understands clock management. He's got the package for a tight end of his size. He's fleet of foot too. He's no slowpoke. So there's a lot to like about Mark Andrews. There's a lot to like about what he can bring to this offense, especially when you're in the red zone. A big guy like that who has great hands and fleet of foot can do a lot of things in the red zone to damage another team. But when it's all said and done, hopefully that fleet of foot won't cause him to be injured upon landing. But that's a story for another time.
Yep.
Let's switch gears here. Last topic I want to talk about here is an Aaron Rodgers sighting, well, now on the Lazy Boy. He's going to be, and I'm not making light of it. I mean, he's literally either on a Lazy Boy or someone with an armoire next to him or, something to keep his leg up because he suffered a season-ending Achilles injury the other night against what we thought a very formidable and high-energy Buffalo Bills team. Of course, the Battle of New York, talk about battles of Ohio, Battle of New York, especially on 9/11, which is my birthday. Nevertheless, he seemed to be in good spirits. He was on the Pat McAfee show stating that the support and the messages that he received it went a long way versus the sadness that would obviously resonate with him this season while he watches it from that very Lazy Boy. Look, Rodgers has always been pinned for his inoculation or vaccination commentary in the middle of a COVID year, and perhaps others may have forgotten. Well, I haven't. I believe that his ability to be humbled by this rupture, not to be confused with rapture, I witnessed against an AFC East opponent in the Buffalo Bills. Now, look, they were having issues of their own. It's not a big secret. Josh Allen has had the most fumbles dating back to 2018. So it's not like he's not prone to those fumbles. But where does Aaron Rodgers go from here? Does he retire or does he find that chip still on his shoulder enough to come back next year and play?
The barber at my shop said he's going to retire, but it's so much harder to come back from an ACL injury at 40 compared to 22, 23, etc. So I'm kind of curious what's going to happen with Rodgers myself. I think he will come back next year, but I also get the vibe that this injury, it feels very similar to a few injuries because I said that when Bledsoe got injured against the Jets, I said there might be an injury because one of my friends who's a Bills fan thought one of the Jets players would get injured on 9/11. And then I brought up the fact that Rodgers wasn't even vaccinated before the game. And hypothetically, what if something happened to Rodgers? I hope he makes out of the game okay. But from a narrative standpoint, I could see why this would be the perfect day for the Bills to do something to Rodgers. And that's what happened. I'm not going to go into further detail. I'm just glad Aaron got surgery and he's making a safe and hopefully blossoming recovery. And I hope he does play next year so we get to find out just how good he is. But either way, I think the Jets, if Zach Wilson does not dominate this year or at least get the Jets to a wild card, I think the Jets are going to strongly consider drafting a quarterback in 24 to groom behind Aaron Rodgers. Maybe not a first rounder, but this draft is just so deep at quarterback, and it's the perfect window of opportunity to get a successor behind Aaron Rodgers, even in the second or third round. If you don't, with that pick you got from the the Packers have your second round pick thanks to the Aaron Rodgers playing less than 65% of his snaps. So you'd either have to take a QB in round one or hope one of the guys that you have a second round grade on falls to the third round in an incredibly deep class. So I think the Jets season's going to be very interesting, but
it could be somewhat tumultuous, or it could be probably the best thing to happen to Zach, to be completely honest with you. And here's why. When you learn and have the propensity to pick up the type of nuances and the play style and the mentality of a Hall of Famer in Aaron Rodgers, at least from a football perspective, and I'll say that very strongly, you have the ability to pick those things up and utilize that within the toolkit of football in the quarterback position and no other position, clearly. But with a win against a team who's an AFC East opponent, again, familiarity plays some role, but that doesn't tell the whole story. What tells the whole story is that ensuing kick return against the Bills was something they couldn't stop. And they couldn't get out of their own way for all intents and purposes throughout the entire game. Look at it like this. Perspective from a guy by the name of Josh Allen, who has coughed up the ball more, but has made fantastic plays downfield, needs a veteran quarterback underneath his wing as well, just by parallels, keeping it realistic and training him and showing him and giving him the ways of someone who is a Hall of Famer or a potential Hall of Famer. Imagine if Flutie came back.
The dynamic between Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs was in role reversal on Monday night, and it feels ironic to say that, Rudy, because you watch the Bills playoff win to the Bengals. Josh Allen was staying calm, and Stephon Diggs was complaining about not getting the ball. Diggs is the calm one in this game, and he basically tells Josh, play smart. Play smart, Josh. And then he just walks away and goes back to the sideline or huddle or whatever. But that's an example of role reversal in the NFL. I think the Bills will probably rebound against the Raiders, but the Jets have an interesting test on their hands against the Dallas Cowboys team that just pitched a 40-0 shutout. And I think it's going to be an interesting game. I do like Dallas to win, but, we'll see what Zach Wilson does with his window of opportunity as a starter. I could go on and on about topics, but it's at the 35-minute mark on your end, 37-minute mark on my end, and I don't want to keep your next guest on hold much longer because it's 9:07 p.m.
He's not on hold. Don't worry about that. That's part two of the Rude Dog Show will be something completely different, and that's going to happen within the next hour. So make sure everybody tunes in for that one. It's going to be good. But I want to finish this off here talking about Josh Allen. He lost 5 fumbles in 2022 overall, 54 times since entering the NFL. So picture this. The Jets have found themselves in a situation in a week 1 win against an otherwise great Bills team, and they've combined in week 1. Now, you're going to probably blow your lid on this one. 4 wins, 6 losses since 2014. 2014. What that means is that the Jets decided to blow this game wide open with that wonderful kick return. That was picture perfect. He got the right angle on the left-hand side of the hash. He took it all the way to the house. It just looks really, really good on paper. Looks great on TV. And the New York Jets decided to break that mold that was set back in 2014 and just blew it apart with a guy who wasn't supposed to be the starting quarterback, but ultimately due to injury, and we've seen this last year with the 49ers, you have 2 quarterbacks that go down. Trey Lance goes down with an ankle problem. Here comes Brock Purdy saving the day, or almost, I should say, losing against the Eagles. Otherwise, they would have headed to the Super Bowl, and what a matchup that would have been. However, the Jets had a very miserable record in week 1 historically, but have found a way to kind of quash that entire narrative. But what's going to be more interesting, as you stated, Chris, everybody can follow Chris at Draft Utopia. I'm Rudy Reyes. You can follow me, Doug Reyes, both on Twitter. Look, there's going to be a challenge as they take on the Dallas Cowboys. As you stated, a very fitting hammering of the New York Knicks. Well, they probably didn't do well either, and neither did the Mets. But and neither did the Giants. So here we are back in New York.
The Jets did better than the Giants. I'll say that.
Yes, they did by far. And two opposite ends of the entire spectrum. Look, the Cowboys smashed the football giants in the Meadowlands in Week 1. It's going to be a very good test on the road, playing in a very hostile environment where the Cowboys fans are very rabid fans. I know that just from being at Dallas Cowboys training camp in Oxnard, California. It was off the charts, just screaming and yelling and people heckling and whistling. And this is just practice. This is just a training camp. I can't even imagine what it's going to be like for the Jets having to hear this in their ear the entire game in a very loud AT&T Stadium in Arlington. But something tells me that Zach's going to be able to get it done because of what he has learned from not only the X's and O's from Aaron Rodgers, but from just being around Aaron Rodgers, picking up the euphemisms, picking up his personality, the way he approaches the game. There's so many aspects to being a starting quarterback who's a Hall of Famer, and what predominantly they actually give to their heir apparents. Well, predominantly there isn't any.
Well, the Jets, apparently, according to Hard Knocks, the Jets' original plan was to start Rodgers for 2 years, use the fifth-year tender on Zach Wilson after the season, and then turn the team over to Wilson in 2025. Well, apparently, this is going to go one of two ways now. Zach Wilson's going to play well enough to get that fifth-year tender and sit behind Rodgers for a year, or he's going to play so poorly that the Jets realize he's not the guy and decide to draft Aaron Rodgers' heir in 2024, most likely.
I'm on the fence only because when you look at a pitcher in baseball, he gets the save. If the team gets the win, he gets the save. I think Zach Wilson gets the save here. And could be the save for the rest of the season. We don't know. We're going to find out what that looks like traveling to Arlington to take on the Cowboys, who are also 1-0. But something tells me that there is so much information that Wilson had taken from Rodgers. It's almost Rodgers-esque type of, at least some of the snaps that I've seen Zach Wilson throw in that game against Buffalo, that makes me believe that there's something more to Zach Wilson than anybody else knows. And maybe we're going to find that out against the Cowboys. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll see Wilson flubber and find himself as a fish out of water. I mean, look, Wilson has thrown in his career, a couple of years, 4,162 yards and 16 touchdowns. The Dallas Cowboys defense is legit behind Micah Parsons and company. He's not the only great guy on that line between him and Lawrence, but looking for an 0-2 start in 2023 for both of these teams, that is my game of the week between the Jets and the Cowboys. No, it's not an AFC.
Yeah, I'm with you, Rudy. Every week we do poll questions on the Scouting College Football Facebook page, and we do that to determine what athlete we're going to put on the cover of Draft Utopia for the predictions week. The original plan was to have Joe Burrow on the cover because one of my friends who runs a fantasy league, he's a Bengals fan. He did beat me in fantasy this week, but Joe Burrow didn't win the poll question. Micah Parsons won that poll question outright, rightfully so, and I think that was the right choice with 2 1-0 teams in Dallas coming off a shutout. It felt like the right time to go that direction, and I think it will be a very interesting Week 2 contest. I do like the Cowboys, but we'll see what happens because the Cowboys were my preseason pick to win the Super Bowl over the Bills. The Bills do not look like they could make a run at the AFC right now. The Cowboys, on the other hand, do. And if they were to pull that off, they would tie the Patriots and Steelers for the only teams with 6 rings. But it's still early. I mean, there's still a lot of football left to be played, but both Dallas and San Francisco look incredibly sound to the point where they might be able to defeat the AFC champion. I don't know if I could say that about the Eagles right now. The offensive tempo, Swift did his job in Week 2, but the tempo, the offense and passing game isn't where it was at this point a year ago.
Yeah, Week 1, I just seen the Eagles just look like they could barely take flight off the ground. I'll be honest with you. I looked at Swift. He was a workhorse for them. But there's no real offensive fluidity there either. I mean, there's clearly more on the ground than there is in the air. One was a 68-yard bomb from Jalen Hurts to Devontae Smith. I like that. That's the kind of play they need. He caught it with him on the opposite end of that, and a would-be touchdown as well. So 2 touchdowns for him. I just don't know the Eagles can take that next step, especially with the anemic passing game that was witnessed in week 1. But look, they won the game. That's what matters. That's what football is about. It's about winning the game because nobody cares about the runner-up.
Exactly. And I think the Eagles are hungry. They're motivated. But it's like last year, the Eagles were able to slip under the radar because Hurts hadn't established himself. Now that Hurts has established himself, the Eagles aren't slipping under anybody's radar. And Hurts is going to have to rely on his arm, his leg, and decision-making. But he wants to win regardless of how he performs in the game. That's just his mindset right now. So I think that is the correct mindset to have when you're getting paid as much as Jalen after a rookie deal. At the same time, you have to wonder when this passing game for Philadelphia is going to click.
Well, we're going to find out in week 2.
Yep.
Chris,
well, week 2 is our Eagles are 2-0, so we'll find out in week 3. But that's another conversation for another time. Thanks for having me on, Rudy.
It really is. Yeah, no problem at all. Where can everybody find you at, Chris?
You can find me on Draft Utopia at Draft Utopia. We have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe to that. And the full length of this interview, including some of the conversations for a few minutes pre-Rude Dog Show, are also there. So you'll get a slightly extended version of our interview. And when that's over, I will make sure to post a link to Rudy's podcast so you can listen to the entirety of that, because I don't really feel comfortable promoting the video without a link to your show, as well as maybe we'll put a Rude Dog thumbnail in if you want. We can put a Rude Dog Show thumbnail in the video so people know where to go to find your show.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I'm certainly more than positive everybody else should know where it is right now. This is Rudy Reyes on the Rude Dog Show. Throw me a follow at Rude Dog Reyes. Go to therudedogshow.com and check out all the goodness in 9 years of broadcasting, almost 10. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Chris, appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Again, follow Chris at Draft Utopia on Twitter. Great follow, great reads, does great with drafts and everything else. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Anyway, that was Chris Ransom. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.